Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to our Latitud Night. If you are new here, if it's the first time you're joining, please let me tell you a little bit about what is this Latitud Night or afternoon for some of you. This is a space for all founders to learn unique insights related to building a startup. We have top founders, investors, and tech operators joining us as speakers and basically as teachers too. And today we have a guest that will literally blow your mind, not only because her knowledge in user acquisition is amazing, but also because her founder journey is very, very impressive too. I think there's someone with the microphone opened. Thank you so much. Awesome. So, well, this person I was just talking about is Courtney. She's the founder and CEO of Runa. And well, Runa is the #1 HR software for companies in Latin America. One of her biggest areas of expertise is, of course, user acquisition. Since she has grown B2C and B2B companies in stages from pre-seed to Series Z. She started her career in investment banking and was an entrepreneur in residence at Morgenthaler. Then she helped Cabify reach every corner of LatAm as their CMO. She led the strategy to scale Cabify to 120 cities across 13 different countries. And if that wasn't enough, she's actually fluent in Mandarin. Yes, you heard right, Mandarin. I will stop talking now since I can see we're all super excited to learn a lot from her. But first, I would love to also introduce our amazing interviewer of this Latitud Night. You probably all know her since she's another kick-ass on user acquisition and a Latitude co-founder, Gina Gotthilf. In case you don't know her, previously to Latitude, she was a marketing VP at Duolingo. So yes, she led the strategy to grow this school app from 3 million to 200 million users. Gina prepared super cool questions around this topic, which both will discuss like around 45 minutes. And then we will have a space for you to ask any question you might already have or like think throughout this night. So we will send a link in the chat in which you can start like adding any question. And I will personally ask to all of you to please vote for the most interesting questions since the time is limited and we will prioritize those questions. So well, Gina, Courtney, thank you so much for joining us this night. We couldn't be more grateful and the stage is all yours.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the great invite.
Hi, Courtney.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I can't see Courtney. Can everyone else see Courtney? Oh, there she is.
There I am. I can see you.
You're at our iPhone. I was stressed. I was like, I can't see Courtney in here.
Yeah, I changed to my iPhone just in case I'm having connectivity issues.
Amazing. Courtney, thank you so much for joining us. Like Lou was saying, you've accomplished so much. It's just like we can go into depth into so many different topics. But today we will talk about, I think, one of the most important and toughest parts of building a startup, which is how do you gain traction, especially in the early days. So I have a number of questions that honestly, I know a partial answer to, and I think maybe there isn't a right answer. So I would love to hear your perspective. And everyone, make sure to ask questions and to upvote because we won't have 20 minutes at the end. And so we want to make sure to get to the best questions possible from you. So Courtney, jumping right in, what were the first tactics and channels you leveraged to start getting traction at Runa?
Sure. I mean, I think as per any startup, you do test on digital just because it's really easy to click that button on Facebook and drive ads to your website. We also did a lot of outbound. For us in our first year, Facebook and Google, all of that was really expensive. I think for a number of reasons that we have later solved, but digital was not really a very economic option for us. So we did a lot of outbound calling, and that, I think in Latin America, that's particularly hard. When I compare it to the States is a lot easier because you have Zoom info, you pay $5,000 a month and you have access to everyone's up-to-date information. I think anyone who's done outbound in Latin America knows that 80% of the data has a problem, whether the person's changed, the phone number doesn't work, the company shut down. So I think there was a long process we set up with a lot of Upwork people in different countries where we would have them taking any input we put in, whether it be a database we bought, a website we scraped, all of the sort of platforms you could be a part of. We scraped everything in those, and just different crawlers we had running on the internet to scrape things. And then they would ultimately all populate in Excel. And then we would pass it to sort of folks in different countries that would then fill in the gap. And then once we had a complete kind of sheet of information, passing that to basically folks in Mexico City to then do calling.
Amazing. And so, okay, so how did you figure out who you wanted on that outbound list? And what did you learn? I'm getting super tactical. And what did you learn about like what works and what doesn't work when you try to contact someone outbound?
Yeah, so I think everything, it goes without saying, anything you do in customer acquisition should always be tracked, because doing things once is never enough. So you're going to have to then scale it. So I think figuring out what takes the least amount of steps and essentially the biggest bang for your buck you want to do. And then I think for us, we were between, we serve SMBs. So our largest is a couple thousand employees. Our smallest is 2. Our average is around 50 to 100 employees. So we were looking for company owners, financial directors, or HR leaders. Generally at a 20, 30-person company, probably the CEO is doing all of that. When you get to 50 to 100, you're probably having some people start to break out in those roles. So we would sort of divide it up. And then, the speech would be a little bit different for each one, because each one cares about different things. The CEO maybe would want more transparency, efficiency, also the ability to not rely on folks running payroll in their company. So they could, if they need to transition someone out, they could do it very easily with Runa. HR director, I think they're much more concerned about culture, but also efficiency, and really stretching their budget as far as it can go. Any sort of SMB company is thinking about budget and how far they can extend it for their employees. And then the finance folks were always about, can you run payroll? How accurate is it? If I'm going to get an audit, is there a backup information with Runa? How are you going to guarantee basically that I don't get any issues with the government agencies in Mexico?
Okay, so creating a process that's replicable, but at the same time, making sure you're thinking about all of the individual personas and taking that opportunity to meet their needs, because, you're doing non-scalable things right now and just trying to get all the customers you could possibly get your hands onto. Were you sending like emails, or were you cold calling, or how are you reaching out?
Yeah. So we did a lot of cold calling, and then we would also send emails. Eventually that evolved into using SalesLoft and having email templates for different customer types. But in the beginning, we were just trying a bunch of different things. Again, like trying to, if you don't have an expensive system for email templates, use a Google Doc and have people copy and paste into their email. Like, you could be really hacky in the beginning, and that way you can change them really quickly. And then obviously, it also helps, as you start to grow, you don't need to have a CRM to begin with, but it definitely helps to start investing in that. I think, one of the things we didn't do at Cabify was invest in expensive systems. And then when we were 20 to 30 employees and then grew to thousands of employees, just a bunch of stuff broke and just wasn't scalable. We didn't have numbers to track or compare with, a year or 2 ago. So I think that was really difficult. And so the learning I took with me from that when I started Runa was, I'm investing in the basic systems that everybody needs. A great marketing automation tool, which we use HubSpot. For CRM, we use Salesforce. For customer service, we use Zendesk. And one day we'll have one tool that centralizes all that information for even better customer service. But I know everyone is at different levels of startups here, but if you're in that early journey and if you have the ability to invest in a CRM, you'll be thankful 4 years later.
Totally. That's something that we're implementing at Latitude as well. I think from our early days, because of that experience, at Duolingo, we were creating like Excel sheets and updating them by hand, and it just was not a scalable solution. Courtney, you talked a little bit about paid acquisition versus organic acquisition, starting out when you say digital, just trying to invest on paid acquisition, which I think is what people often associate with growth. And then being like, okay, this is not working out, and going to organic. It's a really tough balance to figure out where to put your attention. So I would love to hear you talk more about like, what was that experience like? How much money did you invest into paid? When did you figure out like, what, this is not working? Figuring out your organic channels, maybe, and then you said, oh, we figured it out, like going back to then reincorporating paid into your strategy.
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's also a couple of other things we tried that I think we should mention as well. Like, the benefit of being like a 5-person team or a 10-person team is that you can try so many things and you don't even need to get alignment. Like you're all usually just like at lunch talking about these things, which is I know when you're in that moment, you're like, oh, I can't wait to be bigger. But when you're bigger, you're like, I can't wait to go back to being small, being smaller, because it was such a nice time. One of, I think, the things that really personalized Runa was we would do these dinners where we would invite a guest speaker, typically an HR director from, a reputable company, a reputable name, to then sort of, have a fireside chat, a dinner we would pay for, but we would invite like 10 different HR folks to come. And we wouldn't really talk about Runa. We would obviously say, hey, we're a modern payroll platform and hopefully one day you'll all use us, but this isn't about us. It's about talking about HR. I think it helped us learn a lot more about, that person, that profile. We call them like the internal champion who we ultimately have to win over always, whether the CEO brings us in or the finance person, you have to win over the HR person. And it helped us learn about them, but it also helped them kind of build trust with us and get to know us as like legitimate people trying to build a legitimate business, and not just sort of, fly by the seat of their pants startup that's going to run payroll wrong and leave them with problems a year later, which I think a lot of people worried about. And, we did one every 2 weeks, but, after a year of that, like you meet a lot of people, and there's still people to this day that, went to a dinner 4 years ago that I'm sure neither of us really even remember sitting with each other. But especially as a CEO, I think it's really good to go to those things because you share sort of your legitimacy, and that then, lends legitimacy to what you're building. So I would say that obviously was not scalable, right? But that's a really cool thing you can do year one that I think gives a lot of personality. And then that personality can then stick with you. And you can do those things on a larger scale. They're just not as kind of personal. You can do them in conferences. Obviously, we did a lot of online webinars as well. But I really think the magic for us was in those small group dinners that we did. But again, I wasn't sitting there waiting for sales, right? Waiting for a sale to come in. Like I was like, this is a long-term investment.
Totally. I was going to say it's kind of like this, but we don't buy anybody dinner or drinks. So
exactly.
Same.
Yeah.
No, but I think that's such a good point. So basically, thinking of businesses as sometimes I say, it's not really B2B, it's B2C, because your C is that HR person
totally
and like really developing that relationship and like seeing it as a long-term game.
And you learn, right? Like you're learning from them too. Like what sort of questions do they ask? Like what do they care about? What do they use today? Right. And so it does give you a really good profile. And I think particularly in the HR industry in Latin America, not a lot of people knock on their doors. And so I think for us, it was really great to say, hey, you're like a superstar in our world. Like, please let us have you be the star of this dinner, and share a bunch of people who want to come and ask you questions. But to go back to your point, sort of how we thought about these things was, so we, Runa is a modern payroll software. It's HR and payroll, but really the reason why people use us is because we've cracked payroll and made it easier for Mexico. The concept isn't new. There's a lot of companies in the Valley that have done this. And so when we were looking at starting Runa, we really just researched like, how did they grow when they started? And we, their ex-head of sales, who was there from $0 to a couple $1 million a month, sort of shared with us how they really did everything early on. And I think we took a lot of lessons in that. One of them was SEO. Not all businesses are worthwhile to do SEO on, but payroll is one of them. There's a lot of highly Googled terms in payroll. So while developers were building the first version of Runa, we started building out an article database with a lot of those keywords. And still a lot of our articles come up in the first 1 to 2 to 3 options. When you Google a payroll term, you go to the page, it explains, what it is, how to calculate it. You can download a calculator. Sometimes there's also a video showing you how to do it. For us, that was really powerful. Again, I would say I recommend kind of looking up some of those keywords that are that someone who's eventually going to be a buyer would look up as they come to you, and see how many searches there are. If there's not a reasonable amount of searches, probably not a worthwhile investment. Also, SEO is not something that's going to bring you, it's not like, oh, I want to increase my investment in SEO, just turn up the volume. I mean, you can do that, but it doesn't directly relate to sales tomorrow. So it's one of these long-term investments for the next 4, 5, 10 years that's going to ultimately continue to pay off. And we do see a lot of organic traffic in Runa because of it, but it is a long-term investment. In terms of the short-term investment, and again, I think that the dinners were also another sort of long-term investment. And paid was always something where look, all companies use paid on some level. So we knew we had to figure it out. It's just the initial cost per click were super expensive. And so, we started working with different agencies to try and beat that. We also Facebook and Google had these programs for sort of up and coming companies where you could sort of get mind share from them and they would help optimize your account. We tried that as well. We brought someone in-house. Ultimately, it's always been a battle with digital. We ultimately brought down the costs and then ramped growth, but then it got really expensive again. And so just all the last year, we ripped out digital again and really went back to what we were good at, which was outbound. We still use digital as part of what we do. But I think, it all comes down to your cost of acquisition and the value per customer, right? And I'm sure you guys all know those terms. And what you're always trying to focus on is getting that CAC payback of less than 12 months. I think, I wish I had paid more attention to that sooner. I think it was a mistake. I think I was more interested in growing like a weed and really not paying attention to what costs. It's so easy to grow from 0 to 20 to 50 to 100 companies. To go from 1,000 to 10,000 is another issue. You're bringing in like, instead of 5 to 10 companies a month, you're bringing in like 100 to 200. And if those each cost you, a lot of money, you're going to go through your burn really quickly. And the entire world these days is focused on that issue.
Totally. Yeah. I try to, it's hard to do, but I try to advise, like, try to do organic as much as you can, because you can get really addicted to paid and then you don't really know, where your blind spots are, but sometimes you need both in order to get the traction necessary.
Yeah.
For example, like get to A/B testing and like statistical significance if you're doing a B2C thing, or if you have like a high traffic page that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And then for the paid stuff that you did, or are you using, and have you always used agencies, or is there anyone in-house? Because that's also really tough.
It is tough. I think we've done both. We're back to in-house. I think that we'll stay in-house as long as that's working. And if that breaks again, then we'll have to go out. I think the thing is, like, digital marketing changes as well. Like with everything that's happened in the startup world over the last 6 months, like digital costs have changed as well. So, digital marketing is funny in that, like, it depends on the time and the place in the world and the product, but also like, which is really reflecting on what everyone else is doing in the ecosystem. But then the other piece is also like how much of it you need, right? It changes. I mean, when I was at Cabify, we went from spending like a couple grand a month to like $2 million a month. And I can tell you that like the value we got at $2 million a month was not the same per user as what we were getting when we were spending a couple $1,000s a month, right? So, but all companies ultimately grow through some form of digital marketing. So it is something that you have to learn sooner or later. And honestly, I would encourage anyone who has a company to do it before they build the product. It's sort of, I'm a sales and marketing person. So for me, it's something that I think I've gotten really good at. And it is really the answer to what company you should build. You can, without building a product, know how much it costs to get a click on your website, how much it costs to then fill out a form, call that person to see if they even answer, and then literally just sell the product, even if it doesn't exist, to see if you can actually get them to sell purchase what you're selling. So we've ultimately, as we've grown with Rue now, we've launched different products as well that are complementary to payroll, particularly in the benefit space, like insurance, savings funds, vales de despensa, savings, discount cards, and some other ones. What we've tried over the last couple of years is building also independent websites of those products and seeing like, hey, maybe payroll is a better second product and not a first product. I don't know. Let's put up a website, sell the product as a first product, and then see if after that they're going to then convert to payroll. But you can do that. We did these tests in like a week. We had a website up and running and like the funnel formed and like doing these tests, because at the end of the day, all that matters is how much it costs to get that lead and how many of those leads you need to convert to a sale, right? If it's cheaper saying, buy a calculator over here and I can convert those people to buying payroll, great. Then I'm going to have ads running for buy a calculator all day long, So it's sometimes you don't think about it that way. I think it's taken me a while to sort of come around to that as well. But remember that ultimately what I'm trying to get is a real contact of an SMB with a potential to buy something, right? There's a lot of ways to get that lead. And then what you do with them to try and convert them, is up to your team.
Yeah, that's amazing advice.
I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. I mean, if you have follow-ups, if you're in the audience, if you have follow-up questions, please post them in the chat. That was awesome, Courtney. Lou and Clau and Tachita, we should definitely lead a session on how to think about what you want to build using the strategy, because I really love it. And I was going to add, Courtney, that like, I think, you know, it might be obvious to many people here today, but just in case it isn't, to make sure that you're thinking about what you actually want people to do on that landing page. Because if you do ads for like cat here, you'll get like a ton of clicks, and then you're not actually selling the thing that you're selling, because people will, you know, eventually realize that that was, so they wouldn't have bought it, and you build a thing. So just make sure that you have like that second touch point also for like, okay, and then they actually click on buy or whatever, right? Like
exactly. Obviously with consumer, it's about buy. With usually, you know, with B2B, depending on what it is, it might be buy or it might be, you know, activate now. And then if if there's, you know, an ability where you're actually talking to a company, even better, where you can get that interaction. I mean, before we started Runa, I wasn't doing as much testing on the costs of user acquisition. I was doing a test on whether or not people actually wanted the product. Like, I was so surprised that there was such old payroll software across all of Latin America. I was like, maybe the reason a modern one doesn't exist is because people don't want it. Like, I don't know. And so we wireframed out the whole product. We stuck it in the InVision, and then we literally went to go sell it to people, just like I had just built it, right? But I think it's so, I always tell people it's so important to do that, because it's cheap. Like, you know, if you're not a designer, I'm sure you can find a designer on Fiverr that can make something good enough, right? And invest in that. Click the screens together in InVision, you know, connect them, and then go and give a demo. I mean, you learn a lot. You learn about the competition, you learn about pricing. And I think in that we got a lot of interest, which is why we ultimately raised, you know, our seed round and decided to go build it.
Super cool. Okay, so let's think a little bit more long term. We know that acquisition isn't just acquisition, it also requires retention, because if you're buying a bunch or getting a bunch of clients and they're all falling through the cracks, and it's like, you know, doesn't go anywhere. So how do you, Courtney, and does your team think about like that sort of like, where are we focusing? Are we focusing on acquisition? Are we focusing on retention? And
Yeah.
you know, you can't just do either or, but you can't do everything at the same time. So how do you think about prioritization, especially in the early days?
It's so funny, because whatever your problem is, like, the grass is always greener on the other side. Like, the beautiful thing about payroll is that my customers do not leave ever. Like, they die, or, you know, they really drive down their burn so that they can't spend on anything. But generally, like, our churn annually is like 2%. So like a 2% annual churn, like, that means 98% of people year after year are staying. And those customers are growing from original cohort revenue from like 100% to 200%, you know, 3 to 4 years later. So it's a beautiful business. I mean, obviously that has to do with, because it's payroll. Like, a lot of this is about stickiness. Like, how many of you have downloaded Uber, downloaded Didi, downloaded Beat when it was here? Like, we all did that. That was the problem at Cabify. Like, LTVs sucked. Why? Because there was so much competition, super low switching costs, of course, right? Payroll is a bitch to rip out and to move to another system. Not only just the actual information, but just like mentally having to learn another system is like, oh, you know, I'm not into it. It's the same with CRMs. It's the same, you know, with certain parts of your tech stack. And so we had that benefit of really deciding early on to invest in a product that we knew had really good customer retention. Now, the hard part of that is that it plays out on the other side, on the acquisition side. It's hard to convince someone to switch from a payroll software. They're not really ready. Honestly, I have so many fires. Right now is not the time. I mean, I can't tell you how many businesses of ours came back. We talked to them our first year. 4 years later, they email us, hey, we're ready. We're ready for Runa now. I'm like, well, thank God I wasn't counting on you to become a customer, right? I would have died in the process. But that's, I think, the shitty part about our business is that, right? But to kind of your point, and something that I think, you know, more extendable to more companies, like, obviously it depends on what product you're building and the stickiness of that product. Barriers to entry as well. How quickly can someone else do what you're doing? And there's like 1 or 2 or 3 payroll softwares in like all of Latin America. Why? Because it's super expensive to build. Like, it's not cheap. You can't just, you know, you can do the mock-up, but then you're going to have to actually deliver the product, right? And I think it's complicated to build, so you need a lot of developers or you need a lot of time. And then the other piece is, you know, are you tracking accurately like all the pieces of information that you need, right? So from day one, we tracked, okay, I have 5 people in the system. Let's make sure we run 5 payrolls, right? And everybody's happy. And that you're really checking in on reporting that NPS at the right time. I think, depending on what your company is, that might be different, but it can make a huge difference if, someone just logs in, it's like, hey, how are you? What do you think of us? Great, right? Versus after you've run payroll being like, man, that was the worst experience of my life. I'm giving them a 1, right? So I think that's an important piece. Also, we had customer service, and we have customer service integrated into the application. So, like most applications, there's a chat button on the right, but it's not a bot, like it's a real person. And what we found, and we can do that because companies, after you learn to run payroll on Runa, you sort of stop asking questions. So we can have really high quality customer service for your first 3 or 4 months while you get oriented. And then like, basically I don't need another customer service agent for you. And you're on my platform, until, hopefully until forever.
Till you die.
Yes, exactly. And I think the other part is, really focusing on those tickets that come in from customer service. We're always improving how there's a ton of reporting, but then how do you actually like stick that into a dashboard that's actionable, right? Feedback from there, I think is hugely drives our customer pipeline. The other feedback channel is, again, going back to your CRM on the sales time, like, why are we losing deals? Like, what features do we not have that would help us close more deals? And unfortunately, when you're in a company like payroll, there's like 3,000 features, right? So you're like, how do we like consolidate that to a simple checklist in Salesforce? And I think, you consolidate it into buckets, right? Is it a payroll feature? Is it an HR feature? Is it integration? And then in those, list the top 10 or 20 that you got that are sort of trending for the next 2 or 3 quarters in terms of what product will work on. So it'll help you really value, where the problem is and which one you should work on.
Cool. Thank you, Courtney. That was awesome. Super complete. Continuing on the train of trying to think a little bit more long term, let's talk about brand for a second. So I know that like that's also like an interesting thorny topic, because I think if you're like, I'm trying to just survive, okay, and I just need to like call some people and get some customers, like I don't care what it like if I'm blue or green, and if my website looks nice, I'm just gonna leave that for later. And that's one school of thought. And the other school of thought is like, you got to think about brand early on, otherwise you're gonna suffer for that later. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I have very strong feelings on this. Like when we created Runa, I was like, in the very least, if I die as a company, I want to know I put something beautiful out into the world. And to this day, customers will be like, oh my God, I love Runa. It's so pretty. So, I definitely think brand matters. And I can tell you, I joined Cabify when we were, just really not a pretty logo. And if you go to Cabify and you look at Runa, you'll be like, oh, there's some similarities there. Well, guess who led the rebrand of Cabify? Me. So part of the reason for that was that when I had the same opinion. Now, when you join, it's about functionality, it doesn't really matter. But I can't tell you, when we went through that rebrand, how helpful it was for us as a company, just for positioning ourselves better in the minds and hearts of customers, And I mean, that's a B2C company. I think brand is obviously always more important from B2C. But for me, I think the way we thought about brand specifically with payroll was that, like, look, we're competing with a bunch of like really old, ugly software. The least we should be is really pretty, because it just immediately shows you in the first second of knowing us, like, oh, wow, like this is something different. And, there's something that I love that we do on Runa. We do these comparison pages between us and older softwares. And when you send out the link, it's like you don't even need to read the text, because you just show their screenshot next to ours. And it's like, honestly, do I need to say more? But brand is, to that point, I think there is a certain, there's also people who go over the top with brand. I think, when example, talking about those pop-up pages that you do for your testing, I mean, you don't want it to look like a rickety website that looks like it's, I don't know if this is even real. It needs to look like a real website, a real company, to the point where you have an about page. Maybe you stick in a photo of like a fake team. Like, you need to make it feel like it's real. Because if you don't, then you always wonder, are my conversions not there because it looked shitty or because they didn't want my products? You want to eliminate as much kind of that risk as possible as you think about brand. And then honestly, rebranding sucks. I mean, the company, before I joined Cabify, I had a company in the States that was acqui-hired by Etsy. And that company we rebranded 3 times in like 2 years. It's like a disaster.
Why?
We finally figured out the brand in the end. But it was part of one of those variables, like maybe the reason it was a jewelry website. It was like a crowdsourced jewelry website where you would vote on the designs you like, and then we would manufacture and sell them. You know, particularly in that industry, like the way things look matters, right? And I think it was always an element where like, maybe if we switch it, it would help conversion. Maybe if we change the name, it would help. And it definitely helped every time. But I think in that I learned a lot about, wow, this is just such a waste of time. Like just do it right the first time, right? And I know it seems trivial when there's a million things to do at the beginning, but you save yourself so much time downstream doing that. I mean, we still have assets we use today from like the first 3 weeks of Runa, right? And it's because the brand is very strong, and we, you know, wrote over time, we've written a brand guide, brand templates. We've actually now been successful at teaching the brand to other people, so I don't need to go in and be like the police of brand. But I don't know, I did it for me personally. I wanted to like put something pretty into the world, but I have seen it pay off as well in terms of how people think about us, and especially as a more premium product.
Cool. That's awesome. I mean, we obviously really care about, I hope it's obvious, we also really care about brand. We did have to rebrand because we were super excited about our initial brand, and like we actually hired someone and we were like, oh, we're so unique and this is so cool. And then we started seeing our logo like on hotels and like random buildings and like the schools and like at the airport, like store. And we realized that we actually weren't unique at all. And then someone random was like, we're gonna sue you if you don't change your brand. Like, but and it was actually made a lot of sense at the time to be like,
no, that stuff happens too. Like that stuff happens too, especially if you work with third-party agencies. And honestly, I definitely recommend that as you get going on brand, because the person who sort of creates your brand essence maybe isn't the person to create your software screens, your website screens, because they're thinking differently. But you have to work with a bunch of different people, and again, more risk there as to where they're getting their ideas and you know, how proprietary is it. So it is a risk, but I think, you know, at least on whether or not to invest in it, I think you should. But also get feedback, like as you start to learn how your product is in the world, like if it's not the right fit, change it. You know, it does make a difference.
Really tactical things we learned are, it's really hard to just have like an image, like a thing, like a logo thing, because like that's easy to replicate and also hard to remember. So like having like Latitud thing, like put your name in there, then that's really hard to get sued for. Just a little note. And also I wanted to add that I think that brand also has a lot to do with voice, right? And like how you write things. To me, like that is so important. And we like at Duolingo and at Latitud care a lot about that. And people are like, who cares? Like we're just like relaying information. It's like, no, like you said, touching people's hearts and souls and how they feel about you is so important.
And I think for us, that was big as well. I didn't even think about that, but you know, whenever we read an article about how to do something in payroll, it was so confusing. And it was like, you know, some acronym here plus some acronym here. And it's like, you're so lost in acronym world. Like, what is that? If I don't know what that is, how can I understand this? Nothing linked. And so part of our verbiage is like, literally anyone can run payroll, and how we talk about things is like very simple terms. And if we ever use a term you don't know, there's always like a link in an article to what that term is and why you need to know about it. But even in our product, like when it asks you for raison sociale of your company, I mean, when I showed up, I didn't even know what a raison sociale was, right? So we have a little circle next to it that says click, you know, when you click there, it's like a raison sociale is this. If you need to know more, click here. And it connects back to articles on our website. So, and no one does that here, you know, no one does that in payroll. They're just like, you should know, it's for accountants. Everyone else, you know, doesn't need to know. So it's just a different mindset.
Cool. Okay, we're gonna do one more question, and then I think we can jump into questions from everybody else.
Let's do it.
My last question is, how involved do you think founders should get involved? How involved do you think founders should be in marketing initiatives? How involved are you today, given your background as CMO, obviously, and you know, for teams that are just like 3 people?
No, I just handed revenue off 4 years later to someone finally. It took a long time to find the right person. I mean, as a founder, you are the salesperson, right? You're the salesperson to the investors to get the money, and then you're the salesperson to the customers to sell the product. And I think you need to do both. I understand there's technical founders that don't like that. That's okay. You don't have to be in all sales, but you need to have some sort of sync with sales about what they're hearing. And even with technical people, I still think it's helpful for them to go to go to a meeting or two a week, especially in the early days, because you just, sometimes you think you built this perfect thing and then you hear a customer and you're like, oh, it's actually not that perfect. So yeah, I think it's 100% important. I mean, brand's one of those things where if you do a good job in like a brand Bible, like you can, sorry, my daughter just decided to run in. There she is. Yep, no filter. But I think that if you do decide to go and marketing should be something where you can plug someone else in if you're doing it right. You have a brand guide, like someone else can learn to follow it. You have to teach them and tweak them, but then eventually they'll get there. And then hopefully they'll take it to the next level after they've learned sort of your brand characteristics. And then the same thing with digital marketing. If you're really sort of building out that sales playbook to scale this thing, you should be able to plug someone later, but you do need to be there early on. Like if you don't know how digital marketing works, read. Like it's literally all this shit's on the internet. I've learned everything that I was not a B2B person. Like Cabify, all of my companies before were B2C. Cabify did have a lot of B2B, but it was more outbound sales, and there was a head of sales who really managed that. And so a lot of B2B and all this stuff, I think you learn by Googling. I mean, the wonderful thing is SaaS has like 30 years in the States, so it's a lot of people have learned a lot of things.
Awesome, thank you, Courtney. Okay, let's go into questions from everyone. I think that the team is gonna share what the questions that we have, and if we don't have enough questions, I'll make some more up. Okay, it looks like we have a lot of votes and a lot of questions. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna call up people who put their names down, and if they didn't, I'll read the question out. If I do call you out, the one thing I ask is just go straight into the question instead of doing like an introduction about why you're happy to be here, etc. Because that way we can go through more questions. Great. So the first question is, what is the role of the marketing department when your B2B SaaS startup is in pre-seed stage?
So good. So pre-seed means you probably don't have a product, right? I would imagine, right? Or you're just starting.
Or you have an MVP and you're
MVP.
like trying to, but you don't have any budget.
Yeah. I mean, the easiest there, I think, no budget means, I mean, there's not a lot of budget, let's call it that, right? Because you have to have some budget if someone's working in your company, right? But I think at that early stage, like one, you should be understanding who's the customer you're selling to and understand about the existing way they do things, right? And we really, really went into understanding the old payroll softwares that even though they're ugly, maybe people still like them, and why. What do they like about them? And what do they pay for them? And maybe learning a lot about their willingness to pay for more, particularly B2B in Latin America. And if you're mass B2B, which is SMBs, like they are so cheap in general. They do not want to pay for anything. I'm comparing this to the United States, where I feel like they're like little millionaires on what they pay for things. So really, you have to be cost effective as well. So I think learning who that internal champion will be for you guys and understanding how they do the solution today is where I would spend my time. And then getting into how the competition sells to those people. So you can fill out the website of whatever product they use today and then see how they sell, which I think is super helpful because you see how bad they are at it in our case, how long they take to respond, like exactly what you're up against in terms of competition. You definitely want to be up against someone who's old and tired and doesn't know what's coming versus like a super, in 20 minutes, they're writing you back. Like they have clearly templated emails, that's someone I would be afraid of versus, someone who's more sleepy, that's easier to sort of get a leg up on.
Agree. And I think to add to what you said, like I would say that your marketing department is kind of probably also your sales department. You're just trying to figure out how to find those bees, and how to go after them, and then systematically figure out like what are all the different ways in which I could map out my potential customers. What are the most effective ways to convince them to try me out, to love me, to use my thing, and how to make them happy so that I can bring on the next person, like Scrappy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Second question. What's the best tip you have for B2C?
B2C strategies. I mean, yeah, obviously, B2C, there's a number of ways. I mean, referrals are obviously your best, really great if you can figure that out. I mean, the same in B2B, but I think when I look at kind of when we were in e-commerce and the way that people came to us, it was And this is what I was in the jewelry company and afterwards in Cabify, like we had so much from referrals. The other thing that always works, which I know people don't like, or discounts or things or something free, you know, if there's a way you can do a freemium, that's really great. I know that sometimes it's not always possible. And then I mean, B2C, you have to figure out digital, right? Like it's required. I think it's hard to think. I mean, it's hard to think of exactly a B2C company. I guess I know way more that have grown through digital than necessarily other things. And go ahead.
Duolingo, we didn't do digital. So that's one example. I know that it's probably unusual. But then
how did you guys grow?
So we grew. I talk a lot about PR and like just basically like not underestimating the importance of building awareness massively if you can, and building trust. I think those two things. So like, and it's kind of, those are two themes. So of course, like I get a lot of credit because Duolingo grew from 3 to 200 million users, but like I didn't build the product that actually like was something people wanted to use over and over again. So of course we had something that was baseline pretty good. Yeah. Otherwise, it didn't matter how many people I got on there, like they wouldn't continue. But we went really broad with our PR strategies, just trying to get like massive media or influencers to talk about Duolingo so that people felt like they heard, like they read it one place and their grandma mentioned it because she saw it at a magazine, and suddenly they thought like, oh, this is a really well-known thing, therefore I should trust it, therefore I am behind and should check it out. Like that was the feeling that we kept. We called it the surround sound effect. And so basically figuring out how to engineer getting on like as much media as possible. And then on the trust side of things, I think is super valid. It's more valid even for B2B, but for B2C, figuring out like how to get a potential customer to truly trust that they should spend their time on this little app and they will actually learn. And so that comes from testimonials, that comes from media or media that can be, trusted in some way, or institutions that can give you that stamp of approval, or even studies that show that, people who learn Duolingo got from here to there, then using PR to propagate that message and so on and so forth.
I definitely learned about Duolingo through exactly that. I just heard through someone that it was great. That was how I started learning Spanish.
That's wonderful. Happy to hear it. But yeah, it had worked for me for Tumblr, and so then just kind of kept like replicating. But yeah, so most companies do have to go digital.
How did you guys just question about that? Do you mind if I ask you something on that? How did you guys get people to share on social?
How do we get people to share on social? Yes. Okay. So that's the second thing. So social media, I think much like you were saying about SEO, Courtney, like it's so important to start investing early because it doesn't happen overnight. So I think that's number one. But in terms of getting people to share things, thinking about what is shareable and what is not shareable. I think a lot of companies get stuck on like, buy this, use this. We have a great solution for this or that. Like imagine yourself going on Instagram and then sharing a post that says like, check out this great solution for buying flowers for your mom. Like no one cares, right? What do people care about? They care about funny things. So like making something funny and using humor to your advantage. They care about being a part of a mission or something that is bigger than them. And like, if you can in some way make, that copy or image or whatever you're posting, something that brings people into a bigger mission and they feel like a part of a movement, that's super powerful. So for Duolingo, it was never download Duolingo and learn a language. It was join our mission to bring free language education to the world. Do you believe that everyone should have a right to learn a language? Did you know that learning English can double or triple your income potential? And most people don't have access to English education. Don't you think it should be free? Don't you think it should be good? Don't you think like whatever? So bringing in people like, oh, man, I do think that. I do think everyone should have access to language education. I do think I want to be a part of the solution. That I think becomes super powerful, and finding ways to weave in like those kinds of narratives really makes a difference.
Got it. Cool.
Did I freeze or did Courtney? Oh, hi, Courtney.
I think I froze it. Hi.
Hi.
I'm here.
Well, you're in the winter, so obviously you're freezing. So anyways, cool. Artur, do you want to come up and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. So my question is about like partnering with influencers. So the challenge doing that from one side like could be like simple paid posts, or in the way that we are having challenge right now is to building like co-creating products together with them and having like their audience to be in our platform and etc. So Did you have any experience and how do you see the challenges on that?
I'm sure Gina will have a comment on this, but I've actually learned a lot about this as well through friends as well that have other products. I mean, we've explored a little bit of social, but I mean, I don't know who sees a post about a payroll software and is like, ooh, now I'm going to try it. I mean, we've definitely played around. I think we've tried to extend the Runa brand by me doing more kind of podcasts and conversations and write-ups with like more business oriented outlets. I think that's been helpful for us. I think again, you have to think, it goes back to who your customer is and, you know, what do you think they're going to see that would then convince them? And I think it really matters on like what product, you know, is it B2B, is it B2C? Because I mean, we've all been in the world of social media where we see X, Y, and Z person posting things and it sort of just loses its luster. So I think particularly in us, we stayed away from like very massive social influencers being like, Runa pays my payroll. Because we're like, honestly, their followers really probably don't care. And we went for smaller people, with people with smaller followings, but more aligned with like business to then try and like find our way in there, whether it be us running payroll for them and them giving us shout outs every now and then, or if they have a podcast or a blog or something like that, kind of doing a session with them on whatever would be interesting. I don't know if you have anything to add, Gina.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, you know, again, like the social media stuff, like you need to realize that like people don't care about things that sound salesy. So how can it be super, super, super authentic? So I think that the podcast route is really cool. Like I've seen podcast hosts do that really well. Be like, I actually use Cabify and I actually love it. Like, and then you're like, okay, I'll do that. In terms of like, you know, your question about like rev share and co-created products, I don't have experience with that, but the way I would think about it, Artur, is sort of like, you know, how can you use influencers? First of all, I don't even know if you should be using influencers, but your goal is to like reach a massive audience that is relevant to you. So I would like make a list of where those audiences are. Is that like something that you can reach through like, you know, journalists, or, you know, is it going to be influencers? Okay, maybe that your audience is there. Then I would try to think about it in an ROI framework, like basically how much is this going to cost me in terms of time and in terms of money, and what do I actually expect to be the return in terms of my like North Star metric or what I care about the most. So for example, we're going to co-create a product. I don't know, this is going to take 6 months and it's going to cost $100,000, and I think I'm going to get, I don't know, 100,000 users, whatever. Then divide that and figure out what is your CAC. And then do that also for everything else. And then I think that's, and of course you don't know, and you might have to be like, you know what, these three seem like they might actually have the same CAC. Let's allocate a budget to this, test them for 3 months and then see what were the results. And then if we actually unlocked one of the levers, and we can focus on that one and take the budget away or not. That's how I would approach it, you know, but it's always a learning process for every single company.
Gina, someone wrote in the chat, what about Cabify? We did a lot of social media stuff with Cabify, just because, I mean, I think if anyone remembers when the taxi wars were happening, there was just a lot of QR codes and you know, little codes that you could put into the app to be able to get free rides. Again, I think that helped with a hype. It didn't really help as much with like retention, because people basically, you're getting a bunch of cheap users in that came in, used their credit and then moved off the platform. So, I mean, for building a database, maybe it's good, but I don't know if you're necessarily attracting the right users. Some of these, I mean, we got better at learning, you know, we tracked codes, so we knew which people kind of ended up staying over time, and really focused ourselves on users that had, you know, pulled people in that were better retention. Also, how you set up those codes also makes a difference. Those codes also make a difference, because if you set it up for just one-time use versus using it over six times of using the product, some of that stuff, like there is some engineering to get it to be better results. But yeah, I wouldn't say it was like, you know, that was what really did it for us.
Cool. And my very last tiny little comment about this is that if I were to go for influencers in an earlier stage startup, I would try to go super, as Courtney said, super niche targeted, like someone who like would feel so special that you think that they're an influencer, and maybe they have like 20,000 people or like 50,000 people that follow them, but it isn't going to be like, I don't have time for you, like talk to my agent kind of person, because that's just going to be super expensive in terms of time and money for you. Okay. Thank you, Artur, for your question. Libby, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, sure. So, hi, how long should a brand marketing strategy take to be successful? I'm asking that because, for example, in Airbnb, they pivot their brand to brand marketing only versus performance in 2019. And there's so much like be talking about the increase in net revenue, total revenue, and the decrease in sales and marketing expenses. So I want to know how long should it take to know that it is successful?
Yeah, I mean, brand marketing was the first thing I cut when I came into Cabify. I think it depends on the stage of the company. There's probably examples to correct me on that, but I mean, brand marketing is also like a super luxury, right? Like if you're a wealthy company, you can be a little bit more kind of, it can be obscure 100% like what that billboard cost me and what I got out of it, right? But if you're a startup who literally your next round is going to be about how much does it cost for you to acquire customers and, you know, how long does it take you? I think it's harder to be as obscure about that. Now, that doesn't mean that like you have to look at your blended cost of acquisition. So your blended cost of acquisition could have, you know, your outbound sales, your digital marketing, other strategies you're using, and brand marketing can be subtly in there. And overall, your cost of acquisition works. I wouldn't say it's totally something to ignore, but I do think it's really hard to measure sometimes the returns of brand marketing. And I think that was what would worry me about investing heavy in it early on, unless you could find a way to really track it. But so brand, I mean, in terms of how long, like I would want to have short feedback loops because you don't want to be spending tons and tons of money without seeing if there's a result, you know? So, you know, an example of something we did at Cabify for brand marketing is like, oh, we did like, you know, a magazine page that was like a super, you know, great photo of someone using a Cabify card. And then we would do a code that you would then be able to go into the product and put in. So we could some way track if that was like good, even though I don't think it really encompassed the full impact of that ad. It was a way for us to get something measurable around it. It's the same thing that you see people doing with billboards as well, trying to somehow track that back. Now you didn't 100%, it didn't 100% track back, but I think you definitely saw some had more impact than others just by comparing them against each other. I don't know if that was helpful.
Yes, thank you very much. I was talking more about community-based and because
okay.
Yes.
So like the example that I said of like the small group dinners or things like that.
Yes, like focusing on small groups that can spread like with a similar kind of buyer.
Yeah, no, and I'd say that's, you know, for us, our early investing was really the brand marketing in the small group dinners that we did. And there was zero ROI on those, but they weren't that expensive. And in general, we felt like it was adding value because we would hear people say, oh, I heard about you through so-and-so. And so it was more of a gut, if anything, on that, but we didn't have necessarily a timeline, you know, and it wasn't a super big expense. I think the problem is like if you're burning, you know, I don't know, 50 grand per month at an airport, like, is that useful? You're like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, at Duolingo we avoided, and I know that when we started doing brand really like you spending money on that, it was like 6 years in, and the founders were super frustrated with the outcomes. So Airbnb is not quite a startup right now, you know. Like I think everyone already knows. Yes, as some Zeph is saying in the chat. Okay, David, we have listened to you and we have reloaded the page so that we can ask your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, come up.
Yes. So Courtney, hello. I'm David from Lead Sales. I want to ask you, when if you did, when did you implemented an outbound strategy for your leads?
And you
especially
mean
in LatAm, right? So yes.
You mean outbound team to kind of go and get leads?
Yes, outbound lead and to get team leads, and actually which tools did it work?
Yeah, I mean, we did that from the first day. I mean, it was for me the only way that we could grow because digital was just insanely expensive. And I was also very negative on digital because I was like, who's going to click on a payroll ad? The reality is like people do, and there is something there, but it took us a while to get the cost to an area where it was good. So we did it from day one, and you know, we did it by obviously everyone has access to buying databases, conferences. You can buy conference list attendees. You can scrape different things as well. There's like the top X companies, best place to work companies, like LinkedIn's top companies. Like there's always these top lists that you can also scrape. And then we tried to automate the rest of the process as much as possible. So getting the name of the company, we then found it was very important if they had a LinkedIn or not. Like a lot of our customers have LinkedIn, some presence of a LinkedIn. It's not like a company that has no LinkedIn. So we made that an important part of the process of filling that in. And you can either have obviously like interns or, you know, junior BDRs doing this work, or you can also, you know, find a way to automate it on Upwork with people in other countries that have teams around doing this. But you also have to measure how accurate their information is too, to see if you're really getting enough value around that. But I'd say it was a huge part of our strategy in day one, and it continues to be.
Thanks.
Thank you. Look, the team is like debating whether we should go for the last question, but I think it's super important to be mindful of everyone's times. We're almost at the hour. Courtney, you know, you have at least one kid that we've seen, so I know you have enough of things to do. I wanted to thank everyone for coming. Mario, sorry we didn't get to your question, but you know, you can reach out to us and we'll figure out the answer for you. If you liked this talk, Courtney is an amazing mentor at Latitude. I'm sure you'll like other Latitude things. If you want to apply, our next batch opens in, I think the applications open in January, but you can join the waiting list and the team will share a link if you would like to. And that's it. Courtney, any final words? Thank you so much for your time. Really, we're so appreciative.
No, thank all you guys for attending. And yeah, the more you can test now, you'll save yourself time and money later. So test and track everything you can.
Amazing. And if you're considering an HR services platform, you should look at Runa.
Clearly, if you're in Mexico payroll, please call us.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Awesome.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Gina.
much,
Great question.
Courtney. This was amazing.
Bye. Thanks, Lou.
And
for
for
organizing.
everyone, we'll be sending the recording 2 hours from now, so you can like take notes. I saw a lot of people taking notes. So if you want to go deeper on that, we'll have a recording like via email. Also, we will send Courtney's podcast, so you can listen and also like learn more about all these amazing strategies. And last but not least, if you like, we will have these spaces monthly. Like these spaces are for you to learn and to have insights. So if you want to learn about a specific topic, please reply to the email that we will be sending to you with everything that you want to learn, and I'll be happy like to plan more Latitude Nights like with those topics that you are interested in. So thank you so much for joining, and Gina and Courtney, we can be more grateful. This was awesome.
Awesome. Good night, all.
Thank you. Bye.